There we go. Chris, it's all yours. Take it away.
Okay, I'm trying to do that. Give me a sec here. Can everybody see that?
Yes, I do see that. I see a Pullman railway car.
All right. Okay, let me go to the slideshow here and get my notes. All right. Again, the title of this talk is kind of 5 years of riding to the AAPRCO convention on a private rail car. AAPRCO is the American Association of Private Railway Car Owners. And every year they would sponsor a couple of trips, a spring trip and a fall trip. And for actually 7 years, I went on the fall trips. This particular talk was given to the, I think, the November 2014 meeting of a local railroad museum. In fact, the car owner was present at that night. The way AAPRCO worked was they would set up their convention in a city. They would have the cars collect in some other place and then travel to that city. Now, sometimes, and then there'd be a 3-day convention. I'll talk a little more about the convention later. Then sometimes the private train would leave that city and go somewhere else, sometimes to a third city or sometimes back where they started. But sometimes it would break up at that city. Anyway, Federal's owners usually took the car out to both the spring and the fall convention. The car is, and is right now, in Phoenix, Arizona, actually in Chandler, Arizona, a suburb at the Arizona Railway Museum. It is the oldest Amtrak certified car, was until recently when Amtrak basically screwed over the private car industry, and that the owners haven't bothered getting it recertified. It was an annual recertification. It was built in 1910. It entered service in early 1911 in Pullman's pool service. Pullman's pool service was kind of like Hertz rent-a-rail car. The very wealthy had their own rail cars. The not so wealthy would charter them. Federal was chartered by both U.S. presidents, Taft and Wilson, while they were in office for family vacations. Anyway, because Kansas City is kind of central to the country, after the spring trip, they would park the car for the summer at Kansas City, right next to Union Station. And this is what you're seeing right now. It's Federal on a hotel track at Union Station. With the hotel tracks, you had water and, HEP, 480 volt electric power available to you. In fact, where I'm standing when I took this photo back in the day, I've been on either on the tracks or on the platform. The station concourse, we're going to see a little more of the station sometime later in the talk, is off to my right. But there's no more tracks underneath the concourse. All the tracks you see behind Federal go north of the station. Anyway, this year, this is the 2010 convention. The convention cars gathered in Albuquerque. They then traveled up to Pueblo, Colorado, where we had the convention, and then came back to Albuquerque, where the private train broke up. Now let's see if I can change. So we went on the back of the regular Amtrak train out toward Albuquerque, over Raton Pass. We're going to see more of that later. This is the station in Raton as we passed it. This is, in the distance there, probably about there is downtown Albuquerque. While we were in Albuquerque, we did a bunch of things. One is we went up this tram, it was called, let me get the name here, make sure the Sandia Peak Tramway. We also went over to an area, they call the thing at the top High Finance for some reason, or there's a restaurant and other stuff. Gives you a nice view. We also had a reception at the New Mexico Steam Locomotive and Railroad Historical Society, and they're in the process of restoring Santa Fe 2926 to operation. Now, this was 2010. They thought they'd have it in operation in 2011. It's not quite there yet. last I heard. But they're still working on it. They've made progress. Anyway, we left the we left Albuquerque and went to Wallensburg. Now, normally we have Amtrak engines because they can provide HEP power to us, pulling us. But when we got to Wallensburg, we dropped the Amtrak engines and took Rio Grande Scenic diesels. They broke the train in two. They don't have HEP power, so we had to run our generators. Each car has an onboard generator, and went over La Vida Pass to Alamosa, which of course, if anyone knows anything about narrow gauge railway, this was at one point in time sort of the headquarters for one of the divisions of the narrow gauge on the Denver and Rio Grande Western. There used to be, from this point south, there used to be dual gauge track to Antonito. Well, they put us on just a diesel and one of those full-length dome cars, towed us down to Antonito. We then took the steam train over to, can't think of the name of it right now. There's a halfway point where they have a great big cafeteria and they feed a lot of people. Then we came back again. I didn't include any photos. Another side point is this was for a members slide night at the Railroad Museum, and we were in theory limited to 40 shots. Well, this thing has 87 in them. I had to do a lot of selection to get these. So this is, I don't have a lot of photos of these. And again, you can find all sorts of stuff about the Cumbres and Toltec on the web. Going back over the pass, this is kind of coming up. We came up this valley, came around this track. We're getting up to the pass itself. And here we are at Fur, at the top of the pass. That's Federal right behind the engine. This is the next section coming up. They're going to go, that circle I showed was over to the left. While we were there, they had able to stage. They do this normally. They normally have a steam train that runs over this thing. The reason they dropped the Amtrak engines is, although Amtrak engines have dynamic brakes, the hills were so high they needed low range dynamic brakes for this, and their diesels had the low range dynamic brakes. Riding with us as we went back over the pass was a young man and his wife and an almost brand new baby. He was the manager of the Rio Grande Scenic. As we're going along, there were a lot of telegraph poles on the right-of-way with the insulators. Now, the thing is, this right-of-way is literally on a very side of a very steep hill. I don't know if I could have actually stood on places without falling and rolling down the hill. And I'm noting this, hey, look, there's all those insulators. There were some nice transition brackets. And the kid says, well, hey, when you're here the next time, let us know, and we'll send you out on the Moose. The Moose was their nickname for their high rail truck, bucket truck. And we'll put you in the bucket. You can have all the insulators you want. Well, I got to thinking about this, and those poles were a ways down the hill. That bucket would be all the way out, and I'm not exactly a lightweight, and I somehow pictured the whole truck, me with on the extended arm rolling down the hill. So anyway, I've not been back, and I haven't taken them up on that. Again, after we picked up the Amtrak engines again in Wallensburg, went to Pueblo where the convention was. While there, we went up Pikes Peak, and I took the tramway. They took several of the cars with us aboard out to the, that's where the big AAR, American Association of Railroads test track is, and ran us around the test track loop at 130 miles an hour. They only could take cars that could run at 130, and Federal's only qualified for 110. And I've been on Federal at 110. And the interesting thing was this was a loop, and the loop was actually super elevated for 160. So it's almost like we were falling off. It's almost hard to stand in the car because we were tilted toward the center of the loop so much because we weren't going fast enough to overcome the super elevation. Anyway, we then left, as I said, I had to limit the number of photos. We left Pueblo and went back to Albuquerque by a different path. We went through the BNSF Transcon. We went south, I think, to, I can't think of the name of the town in Texas and then got on the Transcon, went through Abo Canyon, which had been a bottleneck, but at the time we were going through it, they were double tracking it, and they've since completed that. Now, after that, we broke up, got on the back of the Southwest Chief again, and went to LA. And here we are passing the storied Mission Tower as we pull into LA. Now, if you've ever been in LA, this is Union Station. I like these bird of paradise flowers out in front of it. It's a beautiful place. If you ever get a chance to be there, I think I don't know if it was this time, I've been through LA a lot now, this time or the next time we actually went to the Wells Fargo Museum in LA, but that was before they had their Morse KOV set up. Anyway, here we are on the back of the Sunset at LA Union Station. We're about to head back to Tucson. Now, Federal, they have to freight Federal down to Tucson, to actually the port of Tucson, which is a little east of the station, and that's where they can attach the Amtrak to Amtrak. It costs them, the round trip on UP costs them something like $5,000 just to get it freighted down there and back. And when they do that, you have to take literally everything off the tables, put all the dishes on the floor, because apparently freight engineers can't make decent couplings. Because if you don't, it'll be on the floor. So Amtrak engineers know how to make nice smooth couplings. All right, that's my rather abbreviated 2010 trip. Here we are in 2011. This year was one year they did not put Federal on the spring train. So Federal was still basically in Tucson. And here we are in Tucson waiting for the sunset to pick us up, because this year all the cars were going to collect in New Orleans. Well, we waited and we waited. While we were waiting, here we are. There's the owner sitting on the back of Federal. We had another car with us, and this is a freight going past. The Sunset didn't show up until the next morning, 6 hours late, and had a UP diesels on the lead, because apparently the Amtrak diesels had crapped out. Anyway, so we went over to New Orleans, where the cars, we spent actually about a week letting the cars. So if you're in New Orleans, of course, you have to ride on the trolleys. This is the famous St. Charles streetcar line. And you can buy what they call a jazzy pass, $3. You can just ride around all day. And believe me, I've ridden around all day a couple of times. Now, but that isn't why I took this picture, although it helps the Juice fans. I was walking along this sidewalk over here, and I noticed these interesting patterns above the windows. Oops, didn't want to do that. There we go. And then I crossed the street and looked up. The Western Union Telegraph Building. This was their big switching center. Apparently it was built sometime in the late 1920s. It was one of their large ones. I know the large one in New York was over in Syracuse. Now, while in New Orleans, I'm a steam nut, okay? And it can steam anything. Doesn't have to be railroads. And so I went out on the Natchez, okay? And the Natchez is powered, although Natchez is new, the engines are old. They actually came off of a towboat that was working in Ohio in the Pittsburgh area, pushing coal barges, the Clairton. And it is a tandem compound engine. In other words, it uses the steam twice. These are the high pressure cylinders. And if we walk up, there's the low pressure cylinders. And for those of you who are into steam, you might recognize the Walschaerts valve gear right here. And in fact, there was an equivalent set on the other side of the boat. Each side, a quarter out, turned the stern wheel on the Natchez. The private cars all get together, and now we're heading up toward Kansas City, which was where this trip was going to go. And here we are, all kind of coupled together as we're going either up or down. I can't tell you which, the Huey P. Long Bridge. our first destination, and as we normally go to these things, we stop along the way to various things. Our first destination was Galveston. Here we are in Galveston. This is the end of the Strand, their historic district, and that was the train station. It now is a museum, or at least part of it is a museum. If you step inside the museum, one thing that was cute is that this line of all-time payphones. You'd walk into each one, and you pick up the receiver and put, it's a different message recorded on each one. Behind the head house is a bunch of exhibits. Now, the sad part about this is this was after Katrina. The water at this area was about halfway up this equipment in Katrina. And some of the cars had a fair amount of damage to it. I think they've had to scrap a few since then. They've done a nice job, obviously, as you can see, cleaning it up. But that was one of their issues. The Strand, I spent about a year working in Houston back in 1980, summer 80 through summer 81, on a new centralized traffic control design system. I was the consultant to a hired contractor. And so I used to come down to here all the time, but that was before the museum. Anyway, let's see here. I'm going to catch up where we're going. We got to Kansas City. Now, AAPRCO sponsors at extra cost. You can do a bunch of side trips. And I took a side trip over to Topeka, to where the Burlington Northern Santa Fe keeps all of their business cars. I just took this photo because you could see the engines up ahead. I was on, let's see, this was Dome Car Puget Sound, and we're heading over toward Topeka. There were three long buildings, and 2 transfer tables at Topeka. This was the building in which they were doing heavy work on the cars. Like this car here, I remember they had the back part of it all gutted out. They were making changes to it. This was the central building. And you can see there's a transfer table. This was where they did parts work. They didn't normally keep many cars in here. Just this is where they worked on the individual pieces. Now, they let us, after giving us a safety briefing, they just said, you're on your own. This shocked me, actually. I expected it would have been more controlled. So I just walked in and out of like everybody else, all the cars, and I took a whole bunch of selfies. This is one of me sitting in one of the private cars. Somebody on the Burlington Northern must be into physical fitness, because this car had a gym on it. And here you see, this was the front building, the southernmost building. All of these stalls have ready-to-roll cars in them. I'm surprised they had that many. I'm actually sitting out on another transfer table. There were 2 transfer tables there. Kansas City Union Station. I've spent a lot of time working in Kansas City in the 90s, and probably a couple years all told on two different projects. And at that time, Kansas City Union Station was completely derelict. And you can take a tour in the station now that shows you photos of what they got when they started. And it was a mess. The ceiling was falling down, a lot of water damage. This is a night shot I took of it. Here's a day shot. You're basically looking north. That's Kansas City downtown in the background. This hill I'm on, up behind it, if you ever get there, is the World War I Museum. It is a fantastic place to visit. Now we're going to take a little kind of tour inside Kansas City, or inside Union Station. This is the concourse. The tracks used to pass underneath this part of the building, so that the tracks now are north of the building. Just some scenes inside. This was the baggage area. It's now Amtrak. So you still take the train from the station, but this was literally just where you got your bags at one point in time. It's now a 2-level restaurant. This was the ticket booth. And you can get, this ceiling was a mess. when they when I've seen some photos of it. It was pieces were falling down. So they've done a beautiful job of restoring the station. It's actually, if you get into Kansas City, it's definitely worth the visit. There's a lot of other activities. They've got an IMAX theater. It's in part of it now, and there's a children's museum, and there's some railroad displays. And anyway, there's a better view of the Amtrak. This Pierpont's is a nice place to go eat, if not cheap. Anyway, as I said, and this year the train broke up in Kansas City at the convention site. Normally, when they attach, so everybody that was going west had to get on the Amtrak, the regular Amtrak, the Southwest Chief. Normally, they attach the private cars at the end of the train. For various reasons, they attach them at the beginning of the train. And you see here all of the private cars. I'm going to do something here. You see all of the private cars. And that's the first car on the Southwest Chief. Federal was at the leading edge of the train. And as I say, it was the Federal climbing Raton Pass here. This was the test of Federal's drawbar, as I like to say. And here we are about to go through the tunnel. And this little obelisk you see here is actually the state line. On the far side of the obelisk, it's New Mexico. We're still in Colorado yet. And they had to put an extra engine on the train because of the additional private cars. So you've got three cars. I'm standing in the front vestibule of Federal, and this is obviously the first engine. Continuing on down the hill, Federal has 4 bedrooms. I'm going to about the interior of Federal. It has an open back platform. There's then a lounge. There are then 4 bedrooms, the dining room, bathroom, crew quarters and pantry and kitchen and front vestibule. 2 of the bedrooms, A and D, have their original brass double beds in them. You can see, and that's my toes there. I was playing around using the flash to illuminate the inside of the room, and you could see the nice scenery. It's definitely a very scenic trip on the Southwest Chief over the pass there. This was just the stop in Albuquerque. There's the wife of the owner, and this was a couple people traveling with us that year. And you see the other private cars. Again, we went to LA, got on the back of the Sunset. We had, again, 2 cars with us at this point in time. That's the owner, Dave, and that's the wife's brother, Bob. The 4 of us are kind of, I call the regular Federal crew, because the 4 of us have been on every trip. Now, what we're going to do, this is Palm Springs, the station stop. What we're going to do is go to, again, the Port of Tucson. They're going to take private cars off. I literally walked 1 car ahead to this. This is the sleeper that's going to be taken by the Sunset to San Antonio, but dropped there, put on the back of the Texas Eagle, and then it goes up to Chicago. So that's how I would get up to Chicago. So much for 2011. 2012 trip. Again, I went out to Kansas City, got on Federal. We came back to Chicago on the back of the Sunset, I should say the Southwest Chief. And then we took the Cardinal. We're on the back of the Cardinal right now at a stop. This is a famous railfan site. If anybody wants to chime in and tell me where it is, any guesses?
No.
Okay, well, if I look out the other side of the car, it's Thurmond. It's a very famous railfan site. Those buildings were all kind of abandoned now. It was, coal mining, it was West Virginia. And there's supposed to be a really nice railroad museum in this depot. I'm wondering if there's anything telegraphic. But unfortunately, we were passing through. I didn't get a chance. It's kind of on one of my planned stops one of these days or decades. Continuing on the Cardinal, this is the C&O Chesapeake and Ohio Museum in Clifton Forge. This is, I think, 630. It's one of Ross Rowland's engines. I don't know if it's still there yet. He was talking about taking it out and running it again. And I don't think that happened. Obviously, you got a beautiful preserve station and a tower and a shop here as well. Again, this is on my list of places to visit one of these days. The cars gathered this year in Washington, D.C. And while there, I got together with a college friend who was also an aviation nut like me. And we went over to the Uzar-Hazy Aviation Museum, which is part of the Smithsonian. And of course, I'm assuming everyone will recognize B-29 Enola Gay, which dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Ours left DC. We spent our first night at Spencer's Shops, which of course is now a rail museum. This was a very popular trip. We had a lot of cars, I think almost 30 cars on this trip. You can see Caritas, which is one of the well-known private cars, is there. The museum put on basically a baked chicken dinner for us. They pulled some stuff out of the roundhouse. Here we are sitting in the roundhouse, all having our dinner that night. The next day we left for Asheville. If anyone knows, there is a famous fountain in Asheville that was put up by a railroad called Andrews Geyser. And this is Andrews Geyser. We're passing it. It's an area called Old Fort, and we're on the Old Fort loops. In order to gain a great deal of elevation, we had to loop around. This is a photo. If you've got, I think it's trains recently, they had a photo of a train going eastbound. We're heading westbound. We were just down there a few minutes before. Andrews Geyser's over here to the right somewheres. So we're definitely hill climbing. This is what's called the Old Fort Loops. We got to Asheville, and we had a banquet at the Biltmore Mansion. The Vanderbilts were big in the railroad game. Interesting, the one thing I found amusing was just earlier, if you're in Rochester here, one of our well-known mansions is the George Eastman House. Of course, George Eastman was the founder of Kodak. Well, I had been in the George Eastman House just a couple of weeks before, and I swear, some of the rooms in this mansion were so large that you could have put the George Eastman House inside one of them. This place was also, if you've ever watched the PBS programs, Upstairs, Downstairs, or Downton Abbey, you've got all the servants' quarters and the hidden stairwells. Well, this place was full of them. You had, the kitchen where the people would. It was very much. If you watch Downton Abbey, you would recognize this place quite well. The convention this year was Chattanooga, and the first day I kind of went off on my own. And here we are going up Lookout Mountain. I'm only halfway up Lookout Mountain. I took the tramway. This is the down car at the passing loop halfway up. And then this is this year's selfie. I perched the camera on this cannon you see, and that's Chattanooga. Now this is a national park, and I'm wandering around the park. There's all sorts of little monuments to the Civil War. And then in the center of the park is this monument. It's the biggest thing there. And walking around underneath these columns is a bunch of brass plaques. And I'm noticing there's a lot of New Yorkers. I'm saying, why so many New Yorkers? Turns out this monument was put up by the state of New York. The largest monument on Lookout Mountain in Chattanooga, Tennessee, was put up by New York State to honor its war heroes, or actually participants. I like to say, as a New Yorker, it's my tax money at play. The next day, they had arranged for a dinner and a trip behind the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum's 630, which was their then active steam engine. It had recently been restored. I had been there. I spent all fall 2006 working in Atlanta, and I came up to Chattanooga several times to visit the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. And they had 610 running at the time. 610 was in the shops at this time. And they had the diesel, so they had HEP power for the cars, because they also put on a beautiful dinner for us on the cars. We went down to Chickamauga. And what you don't see here, this was a photo run by, set up for, it's just off to the right. You can see a couple people. Literally, this field was full of people off the train to shoot the photo run by. Here we are in Chickamauga. They've cut the engine off. It's a very nice little museum with, and there's some telegraph stuff in the museum, and the resonator boxes are unlike anything I've ever seen anywhere else. They look like classic Acme resonators, but someone has literally done a horizontal cut across the top and put a little flat piece of wood on it. I've never seen anything like that anywhere else. There was also a Lionel, model railroad setup running inside it. On our way back, we actually went a good bit south of this as well. On our way back, we stopped at the actual Chickamauga battlefield. I actually climbed up this, looks like a massive chess piece. But there wasn't much to see. I mean, you had monuments and cannons, a typical battlefield scene. There wasn't, and getting up on this, what you saw was an open field and then woods all around you. The track runs just behind this line of trees. All right, third day, I again went off, I took a cab up to Tennessee Valley Reserve. Spent the day riding around on 630. This is a shot on 630. I'm sitting in the fireman's seat. An interesting thing about this is the crew this day was a husband and wife team. The husband was the engineer, the wife was the fireman, and she was certainly shoveling a lot of coal. We're in the process of returning at their north end of the station, is north end of their trackage is what they call Grand Junction, which is a recreated station. They have a Y here with spring switches. So they've backed around, they've come up the Y, they've backed around the Y, and now we're heading in to pick up the next load of passengers. At the south end, they have a turntable. They cut the engine off and turn it around on the turntable. And it's also where their shops are. It's called the Sewell Shops, after Robert Sewell. Bob actually, before my time, worked at General Railway Signal. I met him while I was working at a Southern Railroad site in the mid-70s. He and I had a nice chat one afternoon. A very interesting character, and he was basically the founder of the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. He passed away some years ago. Now, we also wandered around the shops, and this is an image inside the shops. This is a very famous engine being rebuilt. Any guesses as to which one it is?
Nope.
It's Southern 4501, which of course has since been returned to service. Returning to Grand Junction, I got off the engine and I'm waiting for my cab now. It started to rain. This is the guy, he's coming up from Sewell Shops. He's heading up toward the Y, and then he'll come down on the other side of the station to pick up the next load. This is a shot of the dining room of Federal. If we have a time at the end, I'm going to try to run a video that's on the Travel Channel. And Janet set up the table. It usually got stuff on it, but to look nice for the video, for the Travel Channel. It was made while we were parked in Chattanooga. And in fact, we were parked at the Chattanooga Choo Choo, which was a hotel and business center where they have some cars permanently set up as hotel rooms. And they still at the time had track into the site. It had been the Union Station in Chattanooga. I understand the track has since been torn up, so I don't know what happened or why that did. While there, we also, on the way back, we stopped at the, in Roanoke for a couple of days and visited the Link Museum. I presume everyone knows who O. Winston Link was. Of course, he was a famous photographer, took a lot of rail shots of the Norfolk and Western. And in theory, they were made this very specific. You were disallowed from taking any photos inside the museum, which happened to be the old Union Station in Roanoke. But I saw this and I couldn't resist. So with some telegraph stuff. So, but I didn't take any photos of Link's photos, so I don't think I violated the spirit, if not the law, of their idea. We also visited the Transportation Museum in Roanoke. Here on the left, you see 611, which has since been returned to steam, and this is the articulated, simple articulated 1218, which has not been returned to steam. All right, end of 2012 convention. 2013 was in Napa, California. Again, now this was an interesting year. Our plan, again, I took regular Amtrak to Kansas City to get on Federal. The plan had been then to put Federal on the eastbound Southwest Chief, to go back to Chicago, and then take the Zephyr over to San Francisco, and then up to Seattle. Seattle was where the cars were going to gather for the 2013 convention. However, there had been a lot of rain that year, and there was a washout on the Zephyr line, and the Zephyr wasn't running. So once again, and I've literally lost count of how many times I've been across Raton Pass, either on regular Amtrak or on Federal. And this is the Las Vegas, New Mexico station, nicely preserved. And this is the Harvey House Hotel that was once there, that was undergoing restoration at the time. Yeah, I think it was the La Castanada was the name of the hotel. I think it's since been restored, but to what, I don't know. Anyway, so we went back to LA, got on the back of the Coast Starlight, and this is the Santa Barbara station. They had some cars, old cars. That's kind of why I took the picture. I took this because you can see this is the ocean. If you've ever been on the Coast Starlight, it travels along the ocean. I used this particular picture. I got pole line still standing. Whether it's in use or not is questionable. Anyway, we continued up. This is, we're a little north of San Luis Obispo, which was just off here to the left. This is the Stenner Creek Trestle. There used to be an internment camp for World War II, and I think there's now a prison somewhere in this area. We're on a side track right now waiting for a southbound. We're heading northbound up toward Portland. Here we are at Portland. We're going to come back to Portland in a few years at the end of this talk. It was a very rainy day that day. So we got up to Seattle. Some of you might know, in addition to aviation, I'm also into sailing. I'm here on a lake. I've been sailing since I was a kid. And there was I think it was about a 60-foot sailboat you could spend an afternoon out sailing. That's Seattle in the background. And so I went sailing that afternoon. Also, and this was actually at the arrangement of Les, I'm also a computer geek. I mean, as I didn't really say at the beginning, my railroad career was somewhat accidental. In college, I got an electrical engineering degree, but I spent a lot of my time playing around with computers back in the day when most computers filled a room. And when I went out, I was looking for a job with computers. And the first thing that was offering was General Railway Signal. As I like to say, then thus an accidental career in the railroad industry was born. The very first job I did was a yard. In fact, I sort of ended up in hump yards most of my career. It was a brand new yard in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, for the then Southern Railway. It used a network of 5 of these Nova computers. And of course, back then, this was the typical terminal we had. So this is a little look back. This is in the Living Computer Museum. Paul Allen, kind of the other guy behind Microsoft other than Bill Gates, who sadly also passed away recently, and has put this together. And there are computer museums which have a bunch of basically machines stuffed and mounted. These guys keep these things working, which is fascinating. And this is, you can see this guy's actually running. So this was kind of a little blast from the past. I hadn't played with the Nova in decades. And of course, I had to throw this in. It's key punch. I spent days and hours and months and years sitting at one of these punching cards. It's how I used to talk to computers back in the day. I still like to say I'm a punch card and punch paper tape kind of computer guy. Les had arranged for us to have a behind the scenes. So we got up to their top floor and saw all sorts of stuff they had in storage, including some large IBM mainframes and other things they were working on at the time. All right. We left Seattle, a private car train left Seattle, heading for Pasco, Washington. This is just one scene of the train as we were heading toward Pasco. We spent the night parked at the south end of Pasco Yard. Now, I had never before or since been in Pasco Yard, but I spent a lot of time dialed into their computer system because that was one of the hump yard systems that I worked on. Now, we left Pasco. This is the Columbia River. We're crossing the Columbia River, about to enter the Deschutes River Valley. And this bridge is interesting. You can see the engines there. It's a Y. We're on the east leg of the Y, but there was a west leg of the Y too. Here we are going down the Deschutes River Valley. Another famous railfan site. And in fact, if you look up here along the hill, you'll see all the fans, or as we like to call them, paparazzi, photographing the event. You're looking at about the center third of the train. There's a tunnel. The train is about to plunge into a tunnel here. Anybody want to guess where this is? No guesses. All right. Guys aren't must not be much rail fans. It's the Keddy Y. Here we're looking back. Two of the legs of the Y are on these trestles, and the third leg is a tunnel through this hill back here. We'd spent the night in Bend, Oregon, and got to before we got to this point and got wandered around the town. There wasn't much there to see railroad-wise. The convention was in Napa, Florida. Not Napa, California. And while there, we took a trip over to the California State Railroad Museum. This is one of the engines that apparently they said actually came around the Horn or whatever it was there, southern end of South America on a ship. And this is, to my knowledge, the only surviving cab forward, also in the museum. And they allowed you to get up in the cab. There was a ladder on the other side of the cab. And I always like this picture. I put the telegraphic in. This lady looks awful busy. She's talking on the phone. Who knows? I have no idea what this is right here. This is also set up, and unfortunately, nothing was operating. I tried to talk to some of the docents, but I didn't, frankly, get that much interest. Of course, if you're in Napa, you have to ride on the wine train. So here we are on the wine train. This couple sitting in front of me here. I'm literally in the back seat of the back car in the train. Cabernet Sauvignon was the name of the car. I later bought an HO scale Cabernet Sauvignon model out of it. That was one of my remembrances of the trip. They broke it into two. They're beautiful, great meal. They would serve hors d'oeuvres, and then you would trade places. And we had the second sitting for a nice luncheon. It was very good. Train ride isn't actually much to speak, but the dinner was great. This is just, I literally turned around and looked out my window behind me, and this was as we're going along the path. All right, that was 2013. 2014, trip this year was up to Portland, Maine. And this is a well-known spot right local to here. This is the Portage Bridge across what is called the Grand Canyon of the East. I think it's being a bit boastful. It's the Letchworth Gorge. Now, interestingly, We're on a 1880s bridge at the moment, which has since been replaced. They built a modern parallel bridge to it just immediately behind me, if you will, behind the photographer, and tore this bridge down. There was some effort to try to save the bridge as a hiking path, but nobody wanted to spend the amount of money. I tried to take a picture. You can kind of see the supports for the bridge. It didn't work out very well. Anyway, we had started in Chicago and went over. We were heading toward Binghamton, New York. This is the car owner. We're sitting on the back platform of Federal, and that was one of the more rare female rail fans from our local museum. She rode with us part of the way, Irene. All right, from Binghamton, we took the old Lackawanna line up to Syracuse, and we're sitting here parked in a siding just east of the Syracuse station. Sorry, west of the Syracuse station. That's the Carousel Mall, if you know anything about Syracuse. This is the normal line the Amtrak would run on. We're waiting for it to pass, in fact, so we can head over toward Portland. Got to Portland. If anyone knows about Portland, they have a narrow gauge museum here, and this is this year's selfie. This is me sitting on one of the narrow gauge cars in the museum. I just thought this was an interesting photo of one of the manufacturer of one of the old cars in the museum. There's a train ride, a narrow gauge. It's a 2-foot gauge train, which was popular. 2-foot gauge was popular in the Maine area. This is the northern end of their ride, a little diesel engine. They have a steam engine, but they weren't running the steam that day. Interestingly, if I was to turn 180 degrees and take a photo, you're looking at a waterway. And there was a large swing bridge out there. I remember there was a photo in one of the trains magazines that showed a train on that bridge, but apparently the bridge caught fire many, many years ago and was abandoned. And as you can see, they apparently left the ties, but they just moved the rails together. And of course, this is up north. You can see there's the water line. We're at low tide right now, and it's all dry out, and that went out quite a way.
I think that bridge you're referring to was on the CN Grand Trunk subsidiary.
It could very well be.
Montreal into Portland, Maine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the cars, while we were in Portland, the cars were parked on the southern end of this line, which was still standard gauge. And that's one thing I wanted to get into. During the convention, they would break the train in two. And the first 2 nights, because it's a 3-day affair, the first 2 nights they had what they call car parties, where you would get to tour half the cars. And the cars would alternately have snacks, hors d'oeuvres, and a bar. Federal was always a bar car, and Janet was always the bartender, and she mixed very nice drinks. And so then that'd be one night. The second night be the other half of the train. The third night they'd have a banquet in the hotel where they were having it. We also took a train up to, they actually bussed us up to, gotta find the name of the town here, New Brunswick, up to Brunswick, Maine, which was, actually, I don't know why they didn't take the train. That's the north end of Amtrak service. And then we continued north on the Maine Eastern, which I think has since lost the franchise to operate this track. This was the photo run by, but they had this nice old station that's kind of fallen down here. And we went up to Rockland, Maine. This is the depot in Rockland, and that's literally end of track right there. That was a very nice sports bar in this north end. I had a nice lunch there. You might note there's a bell and a headlight, and this is knowing the train was coming, this was the New England Steam Corporation. It was raising money to restore Maine Central 470 to operation. That's the bell and the headlight off of the engine. Their chief mechanical officer was there, and I chatted with him for a while. All right. Now this was the end of my original talk. This is bedroom C. That bedrooms B and C in Federal are like a Pullman open section, okay, but built into a room. And I was in bedroom C. This is a lower in bedroom C. That's an original Pullman blanket, not a reproduction. And as I think I ended the original talk saying, well, I've been talking for a while and I'm getting tired. I'm going to go back to my home away from home on the rails here in bedroom C in Federal. As I said, that's the end of the original talk. All right, I have a few more images to show you. Screen sharing has stopped. No, I didn't want to stop screen sharing. Hold on, let me start screen sharing again. And can't tell what I want to see here. Hold on a sec.
Chris, I think while you're setting that up, we can open it up to any questions. We're running a bit short of time, so if anyone has any burning questions, now would be a good time to jump in.
I assume you can see this photo?
Yes.
Okay. This actually appeared slightly cropped in Dots and Dashes a while back in my review column. Again, you're going to take a picture of a train from a train. The only place you can do that is on a curve. The 2016 trip, the cars gathered in Denver. We went headed north and ran into the Montana Rail Link line, which had been a former Northern Pacific line. We went over to Livingston and spent several days touring the Yellowstone parks. That's north of Yellowstone Park. Then we're on our way to Missoula, and it's a nice photo across this trestle. You know, you got to not only get the curve of the train, but you can see the trestle. Now I wanted to try if this is going to work. Hold on just a sec.
Are you thinking of the video, Chris?
Yeah, I'm going to see if I can get the video going here.
I think we'll save the video for another time.
Okay. All right. Well, then I have just one more photo.
Okay, go ahead with the photo.
Okay. This was out in your area. Again, it's the 2016 trip after the cars. The convention that year was in Spokane, Washington. And of course, we then went on the back of the regular Empire Builder over to Seattle, spent a couple days. I visited the Computer Museum again. I think, Les, you were out on your boat at that point in time.
Could be.
So we didn't get together. And now we're heading south on the back of the coast, Starlight. This is a little south of the Kelso Longview station. We're heading toward Portland, where we dropped the car and spent several days wandering around Portland. According to the GPS, we were doing about 80 miles an hour when this photo was taken. I'm sitting on the back platform. I sent this out to a college friend of mine, that same one we'd gone to the Uzar-Hazy Museum, who was a rail fan long before. I didn't really become a rail fan until the late 80s, despite working in the industry. And his comment is, it's going to be hard to wipe that smile off your face. And he was right, although Amtrak seems to have done that now. And that is the end of my talk.
Great. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
I'm going to take care of some.
If there's any questions, feel free.